Let's get into the evidence now. The Shroud of Turin has been studied by over 102 academic disciplines, and over 500,000 hours have been spent in scientific investigation on the Shroud of Turin. There's no other artifact in world history that has been studied as much as the Shroud. And just so you know, I've written an entire article on the Shroud of Turin. It's on our blog, the Coffee with God blog, on 𝗕𝗏𝗎𝗇𝗏.com. So check it out. There are several different academic studies and articles linked in that article that I've written on the Shroud of Turin. So if you want to verify anything I'm saying or go read the data for yourself, please do so. 𝗕𝗏𝗎𝗇𝗏.com. Click on the blog link at the top of the page or in the middle of the page. There's blog links all over, and you'll find our article on the Shroud of Turin right there on our blog. Now, there's been several other ways that the Shroud has been tested in terms of its origins, how old it is since then. And they've all come back with similar results. Most recently, in 2022, the Shroud was dated by the Institute of Crystallography in Italy using a much newer science called wide-angle X-ray scattering. They compared the Shroud with a variety of samples of historical textiles documented to be aged back to between the years 3000 BC and 2000 AD. So we're talking about 5,000 years of samples. We actually have linen garments that go back to the year 3000 BC. That's how long this material lasts if it's well taken care of. Isn't that incredible? Dr. Liberato De Caro, the expert who oversaw the dating, lists several of the problems associated with the carbon-14 dating in his study, which concluded that the Shroud is best matched with a piece of fabric known to have come from the siege of Masada in Israel between the years 55 and 74 AD. So the closest matches it to a garment that is known to have been from the siege of Masada between the years 55 and 74 AD. Much, much, much closer to the time when Jesus was crucified and buried, within less than a half century, within less than 20 years, perhaps. Let's talk about the other evidence that is absolutely incredible if you take the time to understand it. So the Shroud is a 14.5 by 3.5 linen garment. It contains what appears to be a negative image of a man who stood approximately 5 feet 11 inches and was killed by crucifixion. That's clear because on the negative image of the man that is basically seared into this linen garment, you can see the wounds in his hands and in his feet very, very clearly. And his body appears to be covered in wounds that are consistent with those inflicted by a Roman scourging. So let me just say this, regardless of whether or not this man is Jesus of Nazareth, there's 3 things we know about whoever this individual who's captured on the Shroud of Turin. There's 3 things we know about him. He died by crucifixion. He was scourged before he died. Clearly, he suffered a great, great deal. And some sort of crown of thorns was placed on his head during this torture process, because there are also over 50 wounds on the head of the individual that are visible on the Shroud that are consistent with those inflicted by thorns. There's one other thing you have to know. There's also a 3 to 4 centimeter wound on the man's right side between the 5th and 6th rib, consistent with that of a Roman spear wound. This fits precisely with what John's gospel says about a Roman soldier piercing Jesus' side only to find that he was already dead. So how do we know about these wounds? Well, not only are they visible in the image on the Shroud, but numerous bloodstains also on the Shroud match the location of the scourge wounds and the crucifixion pits. And, by the way, the crown of thorns and the piercing of the side. Now, the blood on the Shroud was tested, all the different variations of blood, I say variations, all the different spots where there's blood on the shroud were tested, or there was scourge blood tested, there was side blood tested, there was blood from the head and face tested. And all of the blood is human blood. And it is type AB positive, which is a very rare blood type for European and Western people, but a type that is found most commonly by far in Middle Eastern populations. So if this was a medieval forgery, they found the exact right type of blood that in all likelihood Jesus carried in his body, but without any knowledge whatsoever of blood types or the different things that blood demonstrates about what a person is enduring based on when the blood is extracted from the body. Now, here's where it gets even crazier. The blood that was taken from the side, that was tested from the place where Jesus was pierced after he was already dead, came back as the same blood, type AB blood, but as post-mortem blood. So I'm not going to even attempt to try and explain to you all the science that goes into this, but I've linked articles, scholarly articles, in the article I put on our blog, 𝑦𝗵𝑚.com. So if you want to go into the science behind this, go check out that article and follow the links that are in there. There is a difference between the way human blood from a living human is when it comes out of the body and someone whose heart is no longer beating. And I'm not going to explain the differences, but the blood that was taken from the spear wound, which John's gospel says was inflicted on Jesus to confirm that he was already dead, was postmortem blood on the Shroud of Turin. Isn't that fascinating? Now, what about the blood that appears in various other locations that match the wounds in the image? Hey, if you're enjoying this content, I want to encourage you to visit our website, 𝗏𝑦𝗵𝑚.com. There you will find all of our past videos, all of our past podcast episodes, and our podcast series cataloged and categorized, as well as our blog, Coffee with God, where you'll find Bible studies, devotions, and biblical and theological articles, all for free. We don't charge for anything whatsoever on our website. I started this ministry back in 2021, and if you feel led to do so, we would love your support. Every little bit helps. $20 a month, $10 a month, even $5 a month goes a long way to helping us accomplish our mission of illuminating biblical truth, applying it to faith, life, and culture, so that you can know and love and walk with Jesus like never before. So there are, some estimate, up to 52 wounds on the head of the individual, and there are blood tracings that line up with the wounds that go all the way down the man's face and beard and all over his head, front and back. Just so you know, there is no record anywhere else in history of the Romans putting a crown or a helmet of thorns on someone that they were executing. The crown of thorns was actually most likely a full helmet. We think of crowns and we think of headbands. Most crowns back then weren't headbands. They were full head coverings. And there's pictures available. And I actually showed one in the live stream I did about Jesus's crucifixion. And there's one in an article I wrote about what Jesus suffered. There's a picture of what likely the crown of thorns looked like. A full head covering with 3 to 4 inch Jerusalem thorns sticking out of it that are sharp as tacks on the end. This is what they put on Jesus's head to mock him. There's over 50 head wounds from a crown of thorns on his head, and he is the only person in recorded history who was given a crown of thorns by the Romans, by the sadistic Roman battalion that decided to enjoy torturing this individual. Here's an up close of the head and the upper back, which is just covered in scourge wounds. It really is unbelievable. There's no doubt at all, the individual who's pictured here suffered a great amount before he died. There's absolutely no doubt. Also, the beard You can clearly see the outline of the individual's beard. It's very long. That's because most people think Jesus, when he started his ministry, was under a Nazirite vow. So he might have never, ever shaved or touched up his beard in over 3 years. So it was long. It could have been down to here, but you can see this spot in the middle where his beard was plucked. It was ripped out. Now, that's not mentioned anywhere in the New Testament, but there is a prophecy. It's from Isaiah, I believe I'm recalling correctly, about his beard, his hairs being plucked out. This individual on the shroud has the middle of his beard ripped out. So that would have felt great too when they were doing that to him. Let me say one more thing about the blood on this individual. So I told you all the blood on this individual is human type AB positive blood. Did I say that right? I just don't want to get my facts wrong. Yep, type AB positive, found mostly in Middle Eastern men. The blood that was tested from the spear wound was found to be post-mortem blood. And the blood from all the rest of the wounds. This blood appears in various locations that match the wounds in the image. The blood carries extremely high levels of, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, creatinine and ferritin, chemical markers that flood the body when someone experiences massive physical trauma or severe torture. So I'll say it again. If this is a Middle Eastern forgery, or a medieval forgery, I should say, they absolutely nailed the wounds and the blood perfectly. They've got the crucifixion wounds exact. They've got the scourge wounds exact. And they went and found a human. This is what they would have had to do to fake this. Find a guy who looks just like Jesus with type AB blood, torture him, take the blood from his head and all the wounds on his body and place it perfectly on this shroud to match up where all the torture wounds were. And then stab him in the side after he was dead and let that blood flow out. People in the Middle Ages knew nothing about this. Forgeries from the Middle Ages used animal blood, not human blood. In fact, fake things like this from all of history used animal blood until the 20th century because there was no known difference. There was no discernible difference for anybody between animal blood and human blood. So if it's a forgery, it's the best forgery of all time, but it gets even better than this. So some of the world's leading scientific labs have studied and tested the Shroud of Turin. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Sandia Laboratories, Los Alamos National Laboratory, ENIA Labs in Italy, the U.S. Air Force Academy has studied the Shroud of Turin and done work on it. To this day, there is still no explanation at all as to how the image on the shroud was created. It's not man-made. There is no ink, there is no dye, there is no pigments anywhere to be found on the Shroud of Turin. No ink, no dye, just human blood and this image that's on there. The question is, how did the image get there? Scientists who have tested this for thousands of hours still do not know how the image that's on the Shroud of Turin got there. First of all, the image is only found on the very top layers of the linen fibers that make up the shroud. If we know for certain that it wasn't painted, dyed, or stitched, what are some of the possibilities that could have caused it? Scientists have not been able to explain why the image is there, especially considering the fact that it's so superficial. You can hardly see it. You have to actually stand back to see it with the naked eye, unless you put it under a negative image. And then unless you look at the negative image, then you can see it more clearly. But it's almost as if the image was slightly seared onto the cloth. How could this have been accomplished? The best theory that's going right now, and the estimate, is that it would have taken 34 trillion watts of energy, and that it likely would have happened in a quarter of a billionth of a second. That's what's been put forth as to how this image could have been put on the shroud in this way. It would require 34 trillion watts of energy and it would have had to happen in 1/4 billionth of a second. Think a massive flash of light, one way bigger than any man-made machine could have created, hitting a pitch black place. Again, there is no human or natural process that we know about that could have replicated this. Now, there's one other element I need to talk about that lends itself to the shroud being genuine. One other piece of evidence. Just last year, a study was released on the pollen grains found in the Shroud of Turin's linen fibers. Notably, the majority of the pollen fibers discovered on the shroud, over 70%, originate from plants that are non-European. So about 29% of the pollen fibers on the shroud come from European plants. And that makes sense. The shroud has been in Europe for a long, long time. But the rest, so over 70%, come from pollen fibers that are non-European. The majority of pollen fibers come from plants found variously in the Middle East, Africa, and West Africa. So if you say where all the plants possibly come from, you have all the non-European pollen fibers. The plants that those pollen fibers would have come from the Middle East and Africa and West Africa. They all can grow in those places, those 3 locations. But not all of them grow in all 3 of those locations. You can't find all, is it 41? Yeah, non-European pollens found on the shroud in all 3 of those locations. In fact, the study concluded that there's only one place on planet Earth where all 41 non-European pollen fibers can be found together, minus 3 of them. And all 3 of those have explanations as to where they could have come from. All of the non-European fibers, minus 3, can only be found collectively in the area around Jerusalem, Israel. Even the pollen grains on the shroud give credibility to the fact that this shroud came from Jerusalem. It originated in Jerusalem, where it was purchased on the day of Jesus' death by Joseph of Arimathea, just like the Bible says. In addition to this, textile experts who have studied the shroud have concluded that the weave of the linen, which is a herringbone pattern that features the weft jumping over 3 warp threads on each pass. Somebody put in the comments what that means if you know. Matches ancient Middle Eastern patterns, not medieval European patterns. So, all this evidence has been laid out before you. I encourage everyone to go check this out for yourself. Watch interviews with Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. Read the articles. Check out the raw data for yourself. Look at the academic studies. Check out some of the controversies that exist with the carbon-14 dating. Check out the study from the wide-angle X-ray dating that was done in 2022. Check it all out for yourself and see if you're not convinced. If I haven't convinced you already, that there is a very, very, very high likelihood that the Shroud of Turin was the genuine burial cloth of Jesus Christ. Thanks for watching. My name's Blake, and over the past 20 years, I've been a missionary, a pastor, and a Bible college and seminary professor. During that entire time, I've been teaching the Bible. And if you want more Bible content to come your way, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video, and also check out this video right here.